The nurse's lounge smelled faintly of burnt coffee and antiseptic, its windowless walls trapping the harsh fluorescent light. Emily, a young and dedicated nurse, sat in the corner, gripping her clipboard tightly as laughter erupted around her. She was often the target of ridicule in this small, suffocating space, and tonight was no different. "Back to room 201 again?" Lisa, a senior nurse with a sharp tongue, sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's the deal, Emily? Hoping to snag a Prince Charming in a coma?" The room erupted in laughter, and Emily's cheeks flushed. She swallowed hard. It had been a grueling 12-hour shift, and the mocking stung more than usual, yet she knew that showing any sign of frustration would only fuel their taunts. Adjusting her ponytail, Emily squared her shoulders and walked out without a word, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Her destination was room 201, the one place where she found both purpose and peace. Inside lay Jonathan Pierce, a patient in a months-long coma. To others, he was just another name on a chart, but to Emily, he was someone worth fighting for, a reminder of why she became a nurse in the first place. Emily pushed open the door to room 201, the faint scent of antiseptic meeting her senses. The room was quiet save for the soft beeping of monitors and the rhythmic hum of the ventilator. Jonathan Pierce lay motionless on the bed, his once strong frame now thin and frail. The machines kept him alive, but the man in the photos from his file, a confident, larger-than-life CEO, seemed like a distant memory. "Good evening, Mr. Pierce," Emily said softly, a habit she'd developed early on. Whether or not he could hear her, she wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. Speaking to him made the room feel less clinical, less cold. She began her routine, checking his vitals, adjusting his IV line, ensuring his feeding tube was secure. Then came the part her colleagues mocked most, cleaning him, changing his linens, and carefully repositioning him to prevent bed sores. It was grueling, thankless work, but to Emily, it was a small act of dignity for a man who couldn't advocate for himself. "You know, Lisa thinks I'm wasting my time," she murmured as she smoothed the blanket over his chest. "But I think they're wrong. I think you're still in there somewhere." Her voice softened. "And I believe you're going to wake up one day and prove them all wrong." The machines beeped steadily in response, and for a brief moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like if he could answer. What would he say? Would he even remember her? Room 201 had become her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the toxicity of the nurse's lounge and find solace in the quiet. But even here, doubts crept in. Was she deluding herself? Was she holding on to hope for someone who might never wake up? Yet every time those thoughts surfaced, she pushed them aside. Jonathan Pierce wasn't just a patient to her. He was a symbol of the compassion that had drawn her to nursing in the first place. It was a quiet evening when everything changed. Emily stood by Jonathan's bed, adjusting his blanket as part of her nightly routine. The hum of the machines was the only sound in the room. She was lost in thought, reflecting on the long day, when something caught her eye, a faint twitch in his hand. Her breath hitched. At first she thought she was imagining it. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. "Mr. Pierce," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If you can hear me, try to move your fingers." Seconds passed, each one stretching into an eternity. Just as doubt began to creep in, his fingers curled ever so slightly. "Oh my God," she murmured, pressing the call button with shaking hands. "You're waking up." The room quickly filled with doctors and nurses, their movements brisk and efficient as they assessed Jonathan's condition. Emily stepped back, her pulse racing as she watched the team work, but her focus remained on him, on the faint pressure of his hand in hers, a subtle but undeniable sign of life. Over the next few days, Jonathan's recovery became the talk of the hospital. Progress was slow but steady, a flicker of his eyelids, slight movements of his limbs. For Emily, each milestone was a triumph. One morning, as she adjusted the pillows behind him, Jonathan's eyes fluttered open for the first time. His gaze, though unfocused, landed on her. "Emily?" he rasped, his voice barely audible but unmistakable. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm here, she said softly, squeezing his hand. As his strength grew, so did his ability to communicate. One afternoon he said something that took her breath away. I heard everything, he murmured, his voice still weak but steady. Emily froze. What do you mean? Were valid, of course. I couldn't move, I could hear, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. The laughter, the things they said about you, and the way you talked to me. You never gave up on me. Her chest tightened, emotions surging. You deserved someone to believe in you, she said softly. Jonathan's lips curved into the faintest smile. Thank you for being that person. The buzz around Jonathan's recovery reached a fever pitch, with staff members who had once dismissed him now flocking to room 201. Emily tried to tune out their whispers and stares as she went about her duties. To her, he was still the same man she had cared for, the same man she had believed in when no one else did. For that said, nothing else mattered. One afternoon, Emily entered the lounge to refill her water bottle. The television was playing a news segment, its volume low, but a familiar face caught her attention. Jonathan's face. That's him, one of the nurses exclaimed, pointing at the screen. That's the guy in 201. Emily froze as the report unfolded. Jonathan Pierce wasn't just any patient. He was a billionaire, the CEO of Pierce Global Enterprises, one of the country's most powerful conglomerates. The news anchor recounted the details of his accident, a late-night car crash that left him in a coma for months, and now his miraculous recovery. Chaos erupted in the lounge as everyone scrambled to make sense of the revelation. I always knew there was something special about him, Lisa gushed, conveniently forgetting her previous mockery. I spent so much time in his room, you know. Emily rolled her eyes but kept silent. Let them talk. She didn't need validation from anyone but Jonathan himself. Later that day, a black envelope with her name written in elegant gold script awaited her at the nurse's station. Inside was an invitation to dinner at Jonathan's estate. She stared at it, her mind racing. Why would he invite her? What could she possibly say to him outside the sterile confines of the hospital? Lisa's voice broke her reverie. Looks like someone's moving up in the world, she sneered, snatching the card from Emily's hands. Dinner with Jonathan Pierce? Fancy. Guess he's got a thing for charity cases. Emily snatched the card back, her face burning. Grow up, Lisa, she snapped, walking away without another word. Her heart was pounding as she tucked the invitation into her pocket. She had a decision to make, and deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore it. The Pierce estate was nothing short of breathtaking. As Emily ascended the marble steps leading to the grand entrance, her nerves twisted into knots. The sprawling mansion, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens, felt worlds away from the hospital halls she knew so well. A butler greeted her at the door, leading her through a series of opulent rooms until they arrived at the dining room. Jonathan was already there, seated at the head of a long, polished table. Dressed in a tailored suit, he stood as she entered, his once weakened frame now showing signs of strength. Emily, he said warmly, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. She offered a small, nervous smile as she took her seat. This is incredible. Thank you for inviting me. You deserve it, he replied simply. Dinner unfolded in a way Emily never expected. The food was exquisite, but it was Jonathan's openness that captivated her. He spoke about his life before the accident, his rise to success, the sacrifices he had made, and the crushing loneliness that often accompanied his achievements. Do you know what it's like, he said, his voice tinged with vulnerability, to have everything taken away in an instant? To be trapped in your own body, unable to fight back? Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. I can't imagine how hard that must have been, she said softly. It was 15 years ago, Jonathan admitted. But what hurt more was realizing how many people saw me as nothing, just another task to complete. Except you. His eyes locked onto hers. You gave me dignity when I had none. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You deserved that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone does." As the conversation shifted, Jonathan leaned forward, his tone growing serious. "Emily, I've been thinking about what's next, not just for me, but for you." "For me?" she asked, startled. He nodded. "I want you to come work for me. Help me build something that changes lives the way you changed mine. Name your price, whatever you want. It's yours." Her heart raced as his words sank in. "Jonathan, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied, his voice steady. Accepting Jonathan's offer had been a leap of faith, but stepping into his world was like entering an entirely new dimension. Emily's first days as part of his team were overwhelming. The boardrooms, high-stakes decisions, and constant flow of responsibilities were a stark contrast to the hospital floors she had walked for years. Jonathan wasted no time assigning her a monumental task, overseeing the launch of the Pierce Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to transforming patient care nationwide. "You're the heart of this project," he told her during one of their meetings. "Your compassion inspired it." While the work was fulfilling, it wasn't without its challenges. Emily faced skepticism from every corner. Former colleagues like Lisa whispered that she was unqualified, claiming she had only gotten the position because of Jonathan's gratitude, or worse, favoritism. Anonymous emails began to trickle in, questioning her ability to lead, and headlines in the media weren't any kinder. From nurse to fraud, Emily Carter's rapid rise under fire, one particularly brutal article read. The accusations were baseless, but they stung. Donors began to pull out, and the foundation's board started questioning her leadership. Emily felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. One evening, as she sat in her office poring over budgets and plans, Jonathan walked in, a cup of tea in hand. "You're working yourself to death," he said gently, placing the mug on her desk. "Talk to me. What's going on?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. I don't want to let you down." "You could never let me down," he said firmly. "Emily, this foundation exists because of you. Don't let their doubts make you forget that." His words were reassuring, but the storm of criticism continued. Finally, Emily decided to take control of the narrative. With Jonathan's encouragement, she agreed to do a live interview to address the accusations directly. Sitting under the glaring studio lights, her hands trembled as the interviewer's sharp tone cut through the air. "Why do you think you're qualified to lead this foundation?" Emily took a deep breath, her voice steady as she answered. "Because I believe everyone deserves dignity. I've seen how broken our system is and how patients like Jonathan Pierce were treated as burdens instead of people. This foundation is about changing that." The interview aired to overwhelming support. Donations surged, the board rallied behind her, and the foundation's reputation was restored. As the dust settled, Emily found herself closer to Jonathan than ever. Long hours in the office turned into quiet moments of connection, their bond deepening with each shared triumph. One evening, as they worked late, Jonathan looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You've changed my life, Emily," he said softly. "In more ways than I can count." Her heart raced as she met his gaze, realizing that her journey with him was no longer just professional, it had become something much deeper. The Pierce Foundation's first facility was nearing completion, and Emily was busier than ever. Late nights spent refining plans and meeting with stakeholders had become the norm, yet amidst the whirlwind, her relationship with Jonathan had quietly transformed. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, they found themselves walking through the gardens of his estate. The crisp night air carried the faint scent of blooming flowers, and the quiet allowed them to finally relax. Jonathan stopped suddenly, turning to face her. "Emily," he began, his voice soft but steady, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart pounded as she looked up at him. "What is it?" He hesitated, his expression unusually vulnerable. "I didn't just offer you this job because I was grateful," he admitted, his gaze never leaving hers. "I did it because I believe in you, and because I care about you, more than I probably should." The world seemed to still for a moment. Emily searched his face, seeing nothing but sincerity in his eyes. Her breath caught in her throat. "Jonathan, I say you feel the same," he whispered, his voice barely audible. And she did. She felt it in the quiet moments they shared, in the way her heart raced when he looked at her, and in the unwavering trust he placed in her. "Yeah," she said softly. In that moment, their connection deepened, shifting into something more profound. They were no longer just colleagues or partners. They were a team in every sense of the word. Months later, the grand opening of the Pierce Foundation's first facility was a reality. The event was nothing short of spectacular, with media outlets and prominent figures in attendance. Emily stood backstage, clutching her note cards, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. "You've got this," Jonathan said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. His steady presence grounded her, as it always did. The room quieted as she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight illuminating her. She took a deep breath and began. "This foundation started as a dream," she said, her voice steady. "A dream to create a world where every patient is treated with dignity. But it has become so much more. It's proof that kindness, compassion, and determination can truly change lives." She paused, scanning the crowd, her gaze landing on Jonathan in the front row. His smile was warm and filled with pride, giving her the confidence to continue. "None of this would have been possible without the vision and generosity of Jonathan Pierce," she added. "And for me, it has been a personal journey, one that taught me the power of believing in others, even when the odds seem impossible." The applause was deafening as she stepped off the stage, and Jonathan was the first to greet her. "You were incredible," he said, his voice full of admiration. "We did this together," Emily replied, her smile genuine. As the evening wore on, she reflected on how far she had come. From the nurses' lounge where she was mocked and dismissed, to standing as the face of a movement that was transforming patient care across the country, her journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. But it wasn't just about the foundation's success. It was about the partnership she and Jonathan had built, one based on trust, respect, and something much deeper. As they walked through the crowd together, Jonathan leaned close. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. Emily smiled, feeling the truth of his words. Together, they had not only changed countless lives, but also discovered something rare and beautiful in each other.